Okay, welcome to topic 7.10, speciation. We've already talked about these kind of these phylogenetic trees in the past, right? We've drawn these. We've had a bunch of different species coming off. Labeled them A, B, C, D. You can label them whatever you want. Point is, we are looking at all these different species, but we haven't stopped yet to ask ourselves what exactly is a species. So what I'd like you to do right now is pause the video and define a species in your own words. What is a species? Okay, hopefully we're back. So let's go ahead and define a species here. Let's see how close your definition is to the definition of a species. So a species is simply a group of individuals that are capable of interbreeding and creating viable offspring. So, your definition is probably somewhat close to that. You know that a species has to be able to breed within individuals of the same species. Also, they must produce viable offspring, meaning those offspring must be able to produce more offspring, right, in order for a species to be a species. So we're going to talk about how this happens, and the way this happens in every circumstance is separation. So we have these barriers. We have prezygotic barriers and postzygotic barriers. So prezygotic barriers take place before the zygote, right? Before the sperm-egg union here, right? So before the zygote forms, you have your egg developing. You have a full organism. The prezygotic barriers occur before this. Postzygotic barriers occur after this. Usually, when you have a zygote is divided into a full multicellular organism, which are like a lizard. Terrible lizard. But a postzygotic barrier would take place after this organism, has grown to, sometimes to adulthood, but after reproductive age, definitely. So a postzygotic barrier is going to take place after this zygote has formed. So let's go ahead and continue on and look at we'll look at prezygotic barriers first. So prezygotic barrier number one, geographic isolation, is exactly what it sounds like it is. Two species being isolated geographically due to some sort of physical barrier. Also called, you can consider something like this fancy word here, allopatric speciation. Speciation. Allopatric speciation is pretty much the same thing as geographic isolation. It is organisms being separated by a barrier, a physical barrier, and not allowing them to interbreed. Humans, if we were to colonize another planet over years and years and years, if we stayed isolated from this other distant planet over here, right? Distant planet. If we had this barrier and no humans kind of interbred between these two areas, Earth over here, eventually we wouldn't be able to interbreed with each other anymore, and we would have two distinct species, and you'd see a branch. You'd see a branch point on a phylogenetic tree. Humans would be on one side, and then explorers, whatever this explorer race would become known as. Right. So any type of isolation will cause, speciation, meaning species will diverge and create two different species. In this case, we have a flower over here, species A, and species B, separated by this mountain range. So allopatric speciation, or geographic isolation, is one way. The rest of these that we're going to look at are going to be sympatric speciation. In other words, speciation that can occur in the same place. So, different areas. Sympatric speciation, same area. That's what all the rest of these are going to be an example of sympatric speciation. So you don't necessarily have to be geographically isolated to evolve into a different species. This can happen in the same place, as I'm going to show you with multiple examples. The first of which being ecological isolation. Maybe two species that occupy a different niche, right? Will not be able to interbreed, right? So different lizards, maybe that occupy a different part of this food chain, right? Maybe one eats these grasses, one climbs on trees and eats these leaves. They live in the same area, but they're slowly going to speciate because they have different diets and they occupy a different ecological niche. So this is an example of sympatric speciation, which is ecological isolation. So we talked about geographic isolation, which is a form of allopatric speciation. And second, we talked about ecological isolation, which is a form of sympatric speciation. Next, let's talk about temporal isolation. Temporal isolation. Whenever you see the word, whenever you see the word temporal, this usually indicates time. When we talk about temporal isolation, we're talking about species that breed in different that breed at different times, at different mating times, right? So that's temporal isolation. Another form of sympatric speciation is that can occur in the same place. And it has more to do with the life cycle or time that things breed. You'll see this a lot with plants, right? Some plants are active in the summer over here, right? Some are more active at spring. Some are more active at different times. But this will prevent interbreeding depending on that time difference. That is temporal isolation. Okay, let's look at some more prezygotic barriers. These are all, again, examples of things that could be sympatric speciation, meaning that they can occur in the same place, like I said before. Sympatric speciation. Behavioral isolation. Oftentimes, it has these pictures of these birds with different music notes next to them, indicating that they have a different mating behavior. Which is isolating these organisms. Maybe this is species A, and this is species B, and wow, don't they look very similar? And they do. They look very similar. But perhaps the females only want this song that this bird sings, and females of species B only want what this bird sings. So birds that sing this song. This will create isolation and division between these two species because the females only prefer specific songs. This is an example of behavioral isolation. Okay, what about mechanical isolation? This is a situation in which it can be as well, right? Sympatric speciation, right? Can occur in the same area. It's prevalent among insects because there's many closely related insect species, but this means basically that reproductive organs don't fit. Right? The reproductive organisms on these organisms don't fit inside of each other, and they are unable to mate because of mechanical isolation. Makes sense. They have their tool that is there to pass on their genes, and it is not compatible with the tool of the other sex of these species. That is an example of mechanical isolation. Okay, our last prezygotic barrier, gametic isolation. This means that the sperm and egg union cannot occur because the this junction that occurs right here at this egg sperm interface, it's just not possible for that sperm to pass its genetic material into that egg due to the way these different egg and sperm have evolved. This is called gametic. Makes sense. You've heard of gametes before, I'm sure. Egg and sperm, sex cells. It just means that sex cells are incompatible. So maybe mechanically they can breed, right? Their stuff fits together, but these gametes, whenever they enter the other organism, they just don't match up, and they won't pair up and create a full zygote. Okay, so just to review here, I'm going to go back. We are talking about speciation. They are prezygotic barriers which occur before sperm and egg union, which prevent species from, or which enable species to diverge and become two different species. The first of those, geographic isolation. This is a physical barrier, again, separating species A and species B. Ecological isolation, two species that occupy a different niche, possibly in the same ecosystem. Temporal isolation, species that breed at different times of the year, day, month, week. Species that breed at different times, right? That is a temporal isolation. Behavioral isolation, birds that sing different songs don't want to mate. Or females are separated behaviorally by only wanting to mate with certain songs. Mechanical isolation, reproductive organs that don't fit. Gametic isolation, the gametes do not fit together. Gametes are not compatible. So all of those are examples of synpatric speciation, except for the first one, geographic isolation, which is an example of allopatric speciation. Okay, I'm going to call that it for this video, and then we will meet again to talk about the second part of this topic, post-zygotic barriers.